I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down.
Jeremy Clarkson seems to be getting into some silly trouble or another. But what he just announced at Diddley Squat is not a TV joke. It is a reality check for the whole country. If someone with his kind of money is being forced into decisions like this, British farming is in far deeper trouble than most people realize. Why Diddley Squat left 200 acres bare. In late July 2026, news broke about how former Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson was running his 1,000-acre Diddley Squat estate in Oxfordshire. 200 acres of prime farmland on the property were left completely unplanted during the main summer growing season. While viewers of his popular Amazon Prime Video show, Clarkson's Farm, might expect a simple mistake or a funny accident on the tractor, leaving a fifth of his land idle was a weird business choice based on clear accounting numbers. Jeremy explained the detailed reasoning behind this move in his column for the Sun newspaper, published on July 27, 2026. He wrote that action is needed now because farmers have reached the point where it is quite simply impossible to make money from growing food. He confirmed that on 200 acres of his farm, his team chose to plant nothing at all this year. The financial calculations showed that buying seeds, paying for tractor fuel, and putting in the labor to grow wheat or barley on those specific fields would lead straight to a guaranteed loss. The fact is, the core rule of farming has always been straightforward. A farmer buys seeds and supplies, works the soil, harvests the crop, and sells the yield on the market for more money than they spent. But in 2026, on one of the best-known farms in the United Kingdom, that simple formula stopped working. Plus, leaving those 200 acres empty was not even about creating a dramatic moment for television. Jeremy was, in his way, making a statement about how hard it is to earn a living on English soil today. When a wealthy land manager looks at a balance sheet and sees that leaving fertile ground empty saves far more money than actually using it to grow food, it shows that the whole industry is in deep financial trouble. But how exactly does his decision even make any sense? The impossible math. Let's break down the numbers it typically takes to run a wheat farm and see how it explains Jeremy's decision. First off, before a single grain of wheat can be harvested, a farm owner has to spend huge amounts of money up front. You need to buy seed, purchase specialized fertilizer, pay for thousands of liters of red diesel to run heavy machinery, and pay mechanics to keep tractors running. Over the past few years, the price of nitrogen fertilizer went through the roof, climbing to hundreds of pounds per ton. At the same time, tractor repairs and fuel costs kept rising every single season. When all those expenses are added up, the final bill to grow a crop is higher than ever before. But interestingly, farmers do not get to set the price for the food they grow. As pointed out during a press event at his farm, growers receive around 25 pence for a kilogram of wheat. That single kilogram contains enough grain to make a standard loaf of bread. Yet shoppers end up paying around £1.40 or more for that same loaf at the supermarket. The people doing the hard work and taking all the physical risk get only a tiny fraction of the retail price. On top of that, wheat prices are not decided by local costs or how much effort a farmer puts into the soil. Instead, global commodity trading floors in places like Chicago determine the going rate for grain on any given day. If global grain supplies are high, the market price drops, regardless of whether an English farmer spent a fortune on fertilizer and fuel just to produce that crop. Then, you have to factor in the unpredictable British weather. If a wet spring ruins the crop quality, or a scorching dry summer leaves the grain too dry to harvest safely, the farmer takes the full financial hit. A bad season can easily push an arable farm thousands of pounds into the red. For a long time, growers could survive these price swings because of an underlying financial support system that cushioned the impact of bad years. From BPS safety nets to environmental schemes. For years, decades even, British farmers had a reliable financial cushion known as the Basic Payment Scheme, or BPS. This EU subsidy system paid land managers a flat fee based strictly on the total amount of land they owned or worked. It did not matter if the weather ruined the harvest or if wheat prices crashed in Chicago, because that regular payment arrived like clockwork every single year. That guaranteed money allowed growers to absorb bad seasons, pay their supply bills, and keep working, even when food production barely broke even. It was a safety net that kept thousands of family businesses afloat. But following Brexit, the government decided to completely dismantle that old subsidy model and replace it with a new system called Environmental Land Management Schemes, or ELM. Under these new programs, including the Sustainable Farming Incentive, farmers no longer receive direct checks just for owning agricultural land. Instead, they get paid for carrying out specific environmental tasks, such as planting wildflower borders, taking care of hedgerows, creating habitats for birds, and improving soil health. While looking after the countryside sounds like a noble goal, the way the government managed the change caused major financial panic across the industry. The fundamental issue is timing. Ministers began cutting down the old BPS payments rapidly each year, but the replacement environmental schemes were introduced slowly and often paid far less money to traditional food producers. This created a massive subsidy gap in farm bank accounts. Growers saw their regular safety net payments shrink by tens of thousands of pounds before they could properly access or make up the cash through the new green programs. On top of that, the green schemes reward land managers for taking land out of crop production or doing non-farming tasks rather than actually growing food. So if a farmer looks at the math, planting wild grass or leaving fields empty for environmental credits often yields a safer, guaranteed return than spending a fortune on seed and fertilizer to grow wheat. This policy gap left farms facing rising operating costs without their traditional safety net, forcing owners to question whether growing food makes any financial sense at all. The rising pressures. The financial pressure on British growers does not stop with lost subsidies. Beyond basic seeds and fuel, a whole wave of rising expenses continues to hit farm budgets from every angle. Energy costs across the country have stayed very high, making it far more expensive to dry harvested grain and run cold storage units throughout the winter. Because natural gas is a primary ingredient used to make nitrogen fertilizer, high energy markets directly push up the price of plant nutrients right when farmers need them most. To make matters worse, Britain now depends almost entirely on imported fertilizer after key domestic production factories closed down in recent years. That leaves British growers reliant on overseas shipments. Any geopolitical conflict or global shipping delay in regions like the Middle East can instantly cause supply shortages and price spikes. Industry leaders warned in parliamentary debates that these global supply disruptions could easily push fertilizer prices up by another 25%, driving production costs even higher for everyday food growers. On top of energy spikes, new green policy regulations are adding extra financial strain. Both the European Union and the United Kingdom have introduced carbon border taxes, known as carbon border adjustment mechanisms. These policies place a carbon fee on energy-intensive imports like nitrogen fertilizer. While the main goal is to lower global emissions, the immediate result for growers is simple. Imported fertilizer becomes significantly more expensive. When you combine new carbon charges with high energy bills, the baseline cost of growing a single acre of wheat reaches levels that smaller operations simply cannot afford. Large commercial agribusinesses working thousands of acres can sometimes manage by spreading these heavy costs across large crop volumes. But mid-sized family farms working 200 to 500 acres carry the full weight of these rising overheads. They do not have corporate backing or deep financial reserves to cushion the blow. Every single price increase on tractor fuel or field fertilizer comes straight out of the family bank account. These compounding financial pressures turned what used to be a tough occupation into an absolute struggle for survival across rural Britain. And as these economic realities pushed ordinary growers to the edge, Jeremy found himself moving from a celebrity entertainer into an outspoken public figure, leading the charge for the entire industry. Jeremy's journey to Whitehall. When Jeremy bought Diddley Squat Farm in Oxfordshire back in 2008, he treated the venture as a casual hobby. He hired a local farmer to manage the land and stayed out of the day-to-day operations. But when that original manager retired in 2019, Jeremy decided to run the farm himself, filming the entire process for Amazon Prime Video. Viewers tuned in expecting comedic failure, but what they actually saw was an unfiltered look at how difficult it is to earn a living on English soil. Across multiple seasons of Clarkson's farm, audiences watched him face severe weather, crop diseases, and complex local planning laws. His struggles struck a deep chord with real farming families across the country. For years, traditional growers felt ignored by major news outlets and national politicians. Suddenly, one of the most recognizable television presenters in the world was broadcasting their exact daily frustrations to millions of households globally. Without planning to do so, Jeremy became a high-profile voice for rural Britain. That role changed from television entertainment to national activism in November 2024. Tens of thousands of farmers marched through central London toward Whitehall to protest against major policy changes announced in Chancellor Rachel Reeves's budget. The government proposed changing agricultural property relief rules, placing a 20% inheritance tax on working farms worth more than £1 million. Industry leaders warned that this tax change would force families to sell off portions of their land just to pay the tax bill, breaking up farms that had passed down through generations. Despite recovering from a recent heart procedure, Jeremy joined the protest in Whitehall alongside National Farmers Union members and thousands of tractor drivers. Speaking directly to news crews on the streets of London, he urged the government to listen to growers and walk back the proposed changes. Standing shoulder to shoulder with working families whose livelihoods were directly on the line transformed his public image. That London rally marked a turning point in how the public viewed his involvement in agriculture. But as his standing grew among rural communities, critics began digging into his past statements about why he bought farmland in the first place. Walking back the tax exemption myth. When Jeremy arrived in London to join the farmers' protest in November 2024, television journalists immediately confronted him about his own past remarks. Years earlier, in a 2021 interview and in old newspaper columns, he had openly stated that avoiding inheritance tax was a major reason he bought his farm back in 2008. He had even written that farmland was a better investment than any traditional bank because the government could not touch your money when you died. That old quote made him an easy target for critics, who claimed he was only protesting to protect his own personal wealth rather than helping real growers. Standing in front of television news crews outside Parliament, reporter Victoria Derbyshire asked him directly about those earlier comments. Instead of dodging the question, Jeremy set the record straight and publicly corrected his own story on the spot. He admitted that tax avoidance was not the real motivation behind purchasing the property in the first place. He explained that he originally bought the 400-acre estate simply because he wanted a private place in the countryside to shoot game birds. However, back when he bought it, he felt embarrassed to state that publicly on camera, worrying that animal welfare groups would criticize him for buying land just to shoot pheasants. So he came up with what he thought was a clever public relations story and claimed he bought it as a tax strategy. He admitted that his old joke had come back to bite him, but insisted that the protest was about supporting real working families rather than his own personal background. That open admission actually helped his reputation among traditional agricultural workers. Real working growers had long grown tired of rich city investors purchasing working land purely as a tax shelter. When he admitted that his past tax claims were just journalistic exaggeration, he showed that he was taking the current crisis seriously. He was no longer treating farm ownership like an amusing hobby or a clever financial trick, but was standing sincerely alongside families who depended on their soil to survive. He recognized that for ordinary working farms, these tax changes were not a media game, but a threat to their family heritage. The Westminster disconnect. With his past remarks behind him, Jeremy directed his attention toward government officials in London who make decisions for the countryside. The heart of his frustration, and one shared by thousands of growers, was the growing gap between lawmakers in Westminster and the actual reality on the ground. Farmers across the country often feel that key rural policies are designed by politicians who have never set foot on a working farm or managed an agricultural budget. That frustration boiled over in his newspaper column when he criticized high-profile government appointments. He took aim at the decision to put Dame Angela Eagle in charge of the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, known as DEFRA. Writing with his farming hat on, he pointed out that her most famous political moment was simply when former Prime Minister David Cameron told her to calm down, dear, across the House of Commons. He noted that she had never worked on a farm and had never run a commercial business of any kind. In his typical humorous style, he wrote that putting her in charge of the countryside was like putting comedian Alan Carr in charge of the army. While his comment was meant as a joke, it pointed to a very serious question that growers ask all the time. How can someone create workable rules for an entire industry if they do not understand what a farm bank account looks like when diesel bills arrive, cattle face disease, cost of equipment maintenance increases, and grain prices drop overnight? To be fair, government officials offer a different perspective. They point out that ministers rely on expert civil servants, scientific advisors, and multi-million-pound capital grant packages designed to modernize rural infrastructure. Supporters argue that fresh leadership without ties to traditional landowning groups can bring much-needed reform to a system that has struggled for years. Even so, the practical outcome of this disconnect is clear across rural England. When growers feel that policy decisions ignore basic financial realities, they start looking for alternatives outside of food production. That disconnect leads directly into the major changes taking place across the English countryside today: solar, rewilding, and food security. When growing wheat on fertile English land loses money, owners across the country start looking for different ways to pay the bills. The decision to leave 200 acres empty on the Diddley Squat estate is part of a much larger trend sweeping through rural areas. Landowners are taking their fields out of traditional food production and turning them into alternative revenue sources that offer guaranteed income. One popular option is building solar farms across arable fields. A solar developer pays a fixed annual rent per acre that stays reliable, regardless of bad weather or falling crop prices. Recent government auctions approved a record number of new solar farm projects, with over 157 developments given the green light across Britain. While renewable energy helps lower electricity bills, covering thousands of acres of wheat fields with glass panels means that land can no longer grow grain for human consumption. Other landowners are turning toward environmental schemes and rewilding projects funded by government initiatives. When planting wildflower meadows, restoring wetlands, or growing native trees, farmers receive steady public payments for nature recovery instead of taking risks on commercial harvests. At the same time, many estate owners are building campsites, opening farm shops, or converting old barns into wedding venues to keep their businesses afloat. This widespread movement creates an uncomfortable situation for national food policy. The soil itself is still among the most fertile in Europe, but the financial model for growing basic wheat or barley on it is broken. If British growers continue converting productive fields into solar installations, conservation areas, or tourist attractions, the country will have to import significantly more grain from foreign suppliers. Relying heavily on overseas food shipments leaves British consumers vulnerable to global supply disruptions and international price surges. Jeremy brought this whole national issue into the spotlight when he chose to leave 1/5 of his estate empty, rather than take a guaranteed loss on his wheat crop. His action showed the public that when traditional farming becomes unviable, the countryside itself begins to transform. When growing food no longer pays the bills, the entire country is forced to confront what happens to its long-term food supply. Now, we've got to ask, will Jeremy Clarkson leaving 200 acres empty force the government to fix farming before our food supply runs out? Or is this the moment British food production changes forever? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.